Hello, I'm John Greupner. I'm currently the Associate Director for the Doctoral Program in Educational Administration. We provide licensing and EDDs for superintendents, principals, and soon-to-be special education directors. I've had an opportunity to work with this program for 8 years, and in that amount of time we're put 7 cohorts out there, which is really exciting. And we've been able to do some very interesting things in our online education field. Some of the things that I'm able to do is I teach 2 classes. I teach a class in assessment and also a class in educational leadership. And both of those programs are part of our competency-based courses. And then we also supplement with our residencies, where we are involved with things like the idea of faith, integrating your faith into your leadership practices and helping students really find out who they are as leaders. So that's my current position here. A couple of major goals of our online program that I'd like to highlight. We are really developing faith-centered public intellectuals as educational leaders. And let me clarify a couple of terms in there. A faith-centered person is a person who's able to carry on a dialogue between their faith and the academic community. They understand that relationship between what they believe and what it is they're learning and how they're helping others learn and grow. And a public intellectual represents someone who takes their skills and capacities and use their skills and capacities in ways that help the larger community, so that they don't just develop a career for a particular area or purpose, but they develop themselves so that they can serve and serve through Christ in whatever areas they're called to. So we really have in that goal a large view of our educational leaders being more than just school leaders. The second thing that I would highlight is developing the competencies for effective school leaders. The state of Minnesota requires competency development, and we use in our online education an alignment between the competencies and the courses and the coursework, so that when a student leaves our program, they have effectively had a chance to address the competencies needed and to practice them and to develop them to a skill level. Matter of fact, the leadership here is a combination of leading both as an educator and also leading in research. So we're teaching both research skill as well as educational competency. And those 2 goals really form a core of what we do in our whole program online. Let me give you 3 examples that I think are interesting in this area. One example is really understanding our audience. We're dealing with adult learners. Adult learners come with a unique combination of experience, which they can bring to their learning at the same time that they're developing sharpening skills that they need to be effective in the work that they do. So in our online environment, we're really working very hard at engaging the students at both their experiential level and also levels of new challenges, new knowledge, and new application. The second one we do is we try to design for engagement. What we know about the online environment is that if you engage people in as many ways as you can, individually, groups, and so on, you can get them to share their experiences, which doubles really the learning within the program. So not just the textbook and not just the materials, but you're really attempting to help people develop what it is that they bring into the course, share it with others, and then gain from what they're sharing with others and the material in the course to come out with even a better outcome for their learning. And the third example that I think is worth highlighting is communication on a very regular basis. We design in our online program very frequent formal and informal communication systems, which allows this sharing back and forth of experiences and new knowledge. And to do that, you need to provide the right techniques, such as discussion boards and group opportunities, synchronous and asynchronous types of discussions. You need to look at all the ways that you can engage people in this open dialogue, both about the subject matter and about what they've experienced and what they've learned. We also use that dialogue about our faith and integrating our faith into the dialogue, so that there are multiple ways for people to bring their faith to play and to talk about how that applies to the things that they're learning in the academic community. So those are 3 examples of ways that we take those 2 online goals and we try to translate them very specifically to what we do in our online instruction. Let me give you some examples of what I see as a faculty member working in an online course, either my assessment course or my course on educational leadership. One thing that I see is I see students motivated on two fronts. They're motivated to share what it is they know, and they're also motivated to learn from others what they can, at the same time that we add the competency learnings and the materials that are important for them to understand, especially the skills that they need in order to be effective. So when you look at a course, you're going to see not just read the book, do the assignments, but you're looking at this ongoing dialogue about, well, how does this assignment impact what I know, what I've experienced? How is it that the things that I want to do and the skills that I need can be developed? And what can I learn from others that would help me develop these skills? So you'll see a lot of that motivation around multiple fronts, not just what we kind of think of as the old send the textbook out, do the assignments, get the credits. This is a real engaged dialogue that we try to do it. It looks like learners directing their efforts towards both the coursework and their own professional development. Now that's somewhat unique in that we've got experienced people. They know where they need to develop. They've experienced this job before. So when they set foot in the class, they're actually bringing professional development with them, as well as the opportunity to get competencies, to get a doctorate, to do all of these other kinds of things that the program includes. Another thing it looks like, very practically, it looks like very busy discussion boards. In my last class, a one-week discussion board may have anywhere from 180 to 200 and some responses back and forth amongst a group of 20-some students. There's a lot of dialogue just at that level. It looks like groups that are engaged in projects and discussions. They're engaged in case studies. They're engaged in different kinds of activities where they have to have ongoing, very honest, very in-depth conversations. And at the same time, you will see students running all over looking for resources. Where can I find more information about this? And it's not just the internet, but it's finding connections amongst their own cohort, finding connections with the material that they're reading and discovering, where they can go to experts and they can go to others and say, well, what do I need to know about this? What do you know that will be of benefit to me? So we get that very, very active, and in that process, I think one of the real important things that you'll see is a lot of questioning. You'll see a lot of students questioning other students, learners questioning other learners. And what they're doing is they're not just asking sort of, well, isn't that nice, I'm glad you know that type questions. What they're asking is, where did you learn that from? How does that impact on what you do? How might that impact on what I do? How could we learn more about it? Where can we go to find information about this? So they're in that process of not just looking for somebody to tell them, but they're engaged with their learners, their fellow learners, in the process of finding out what they need to know in order to be better at what they want to do. And again, this is all about really serving an opportunity, as we said earlier, in the public intellectual, about gaining these skills so you can offer them back to the larger community. And one of the last things that it really looks like that I think is worth highlighting is it really looks like a community of learners using the tools and the resources that we have available currently on Blackboard, through our libraries, through all those kinds of professional organizations that we work in, really going to the larger resources themselves, their cohort members, their faculty, and trying to develop through all of those resources the best learning environment that they can. We're not creating for them an environment. They're creating it for themselves. And that's what an adult learner needs. You don't walk them through everything. You let them figure out how to walk through things, because that's how they're going to gain, and it's also how we're going to learn as a program what's effective. So I think in summary, I'd say what you would see very practically is a very active and engaged process. It is not a passive process, even though sometimes people would highlight online learning as a more passive environment. It clearly isn't passive, because it just really involves the whole person, their purpose, and the desire to be a public intellectual and to serve Christ in a way that really engages them, motivates them to get involved. And that's what we want to see, and I think in many cases, if you were to just take a stroll through an online class that we offer, just by the numbers of interactions and by the different kinds of learnings that you would see and the outputs we get from the courses, the papers that are written, the projects that are completed, the insights that are written, the reflections that are done, that the learning runs very, very deep as a result of their online experience. Follow up on what we discussed about online learning and take a look at some of the basic parts of an online course. We'll try to cover those parts of the course that allow you to see how the students enter the course, how the students manage the course, how a discussion happens, and how we do some assessment using rubrics to help the student understand what a quality online response, a quality online assignment would look like. Let's move to what would typically be the page you'd see as a student if you opened up your Blackboard and went to an online course. Let's start by taking a look at an opening page to an online course. And the main place that the students are going to engage this course is on the left side when you look at the menu. This menu is really what you want your students to be tracking within the course. Let's just take a look at a few of the major pieces of an online menu for a Blackboard course. First of all, with announcements, this is where we're going to communicate with the students. Using a single communication vehicle or location really helps you keep from creating contrary information. If you're talking to them on the discussion board about the course, and you're talking to them in postings about the course, and you're talking to them in the syllabus about the course, it gets confusing. So the idea of having a central location where the students know that you will have the most recent information and you can give them updates on what's going on. The syllabus would be the second spot, and again, this is an important part for the student to be able to get a copy of that syllabus as needed. Course information is a breakdown in many cases of the syllabus and things that you want to make sure that the student pays attention to. In this case, there's expansion on posting plans, there's some discussion on courses, and then there's also a rubric for how you carry on a discussion. We'll return to this a little bit later and talk about it more. The assignments page is a place where the student can function with turning in work. On the assignment page, they can get a review of the assignment and also an opportunity to turn that assignment in so that the professor will see it in the gradebook and be able to comment and return it to the student. The course discussion board is a heart of any one of the online courses. It's on the discussion board that you're engaged with your students in conversation about content in the course, ideas, all the things that really revolve around the course. As we move a little farther down here, you'll see that we've got groups set up for this course. Each one of the groups has its own page, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. External links, bringing a lot of information into a course from the outside, is one of the real advantages of online. Easy access to a whole variety of information. And that's set up within the external links as a way in which students can get to it quickly and make use of it. And the remainder of this particular course, this is EDUC 805, which is a course on leadership, is set up in modules. So we're telling the students, here's module 1 and what's responsible for you, what you're responsible for module 1, module 2, module 3, and module 4. Each one is 2 weeks long and contains different major outcomes and different content. You will also have for the students a My Grades section or something similar. Now this section doesn't show up for me because I'm not graded, but I'm doing the grading. But a student here would be able to see whatever feedback you're giving them on grades, not only what grades you're entering, but any comments that you're making to them on it. And then a few of the other things that students have told us are helpful is there's a communication spot where you're able to communicate in all different manners with the students, with the professor, even with the university. Then there are some tools that are available, and these tools involve being able to get into a common classroom, Adobe Connect, other places where students might want to do some work, might want to have an opportunity. This includes contacts with the Media Center. And then in this particular course as an integration in faith, one of the parts of integrating faith is to use a devotional section and try to select topics that fit closely with the content and allow the student, if they choose, to spend some time looking at the issue, in this case, looking at the issue of faith integration and leadership. So that would give you an idea if you were a student coming into a class where you would really begin. As you begin on your menu, you'd want to know what each of these items includes in the menu. And once your student is informed on this menu, they really can travel through the class quite easily. Look look at the announcements just to get an idea of how you're communicating with the students in class. I'm on the announcements page, which came off of the menu on the left. And let's just take a look at an example of an announcement here. You can see how as I scroll down, these announcements come in sequence. So it's like talking to the students over time, no different than if the student walked into the classroom and you had an opportunity to sit down and talk to the class about, hey, what's going on today, and here's where we are, and things like that. You'll notice in this one, here's a Module 2 wrap-up. In this, I'm saying, okay, we're going to wrap up this module, and we're moving into Module 3. Here are some of the things. It starts off with the work you've completed in Module 2 was excellent. Began with some reinforcement, things that really worked well, things that we can work on. And then we get into Module 3 reminders, and we're starting to talk about here's what's coming up in Module 3, some changes that are taking place in Module 4. And so what I'm doing on the announcements is structuring for the student, just like you'd structure at the start of most classes, what it is you want them to know. This takes the confusion out and allows them to focus on what you want them to really do in the course, instead of spend all their time trying to figure out what's the course actually doing. And then as you go through here, there's detail, and usually there's some type of inspirational quotes, short stories, sometimes opportunities to ask good questions. And again, never passing up the opportunity to get someone to engage and think. Your announcements are a great place in which you can reinforce people, encourage people, and also get people to think further into a topic or subject that you're going to be carrying on in that module. So many of these pieces can be pieces that sort of lead into where it is that you're taking your students in coursework. So that would be a quick idea of what you might do to make the announcements the place in which the students know they can always keep track of what's going on in the class. Now from here, if they need to ask you questions, one of the things that I've found very successful is to put on your discussion board a question, a Q&A place. And you'll notice by the large number of responses here, 163 posts, that during the course the students have been able to ask questions about what's going on. Could you tell me more about this? The nice part about your Q&A being on the discussion board is everyone can participate in the questions. Always assuming that if one person has a question, there are others that have that same question. It gives an opportunity for students to keep up and help one another and ask questions that clarify for the whole class, even though maybe the professor might miss the fact that that's a clarification needed. So that's a nice combination of using the announcements as your way of talking to your students so they're not confused, and then using your discussion board as a means of letting them ask questions and engage with the course and the class and their colleagues on ways to resolve questions and to help one another. Let's take a look now at the next segment here. Let's take a look at the discussion board a little bit more. Let's take a look in particular at what's going on in a discussion. Let's go here to Module 1. This is a discussion of a chapter question. This is a question that's been posed to the students. It's from a chapter of a textbook that they're reading, and it's asking them to put together some information relevant to that. Let's take a look here at this response from a student and just get an idea of what's happening here. In this case, the student has posted, and this is their posting here, and cited the text as their posting source. And what they've done is they began to respond to this question. And the question is, how strongly is your leadership style impacted by traits, skills of a leader, leader behaviors, and situational factors? And in this case, the student has given a brief but a very tight answer to this. Other students then have come along and they've said, well, let me ask you a question about this, or let me tell you what I think about this. And their response then would follow that student's response. And the typical pattern is you get this dialogue going back and forth where now this student has responded from her original response to the student who asked her a question and has clarified for that student some more information. And in building these kinds of conversations, you allow a number of students, in this case we're looking at about 10, 11 responses just to that one student's question. And that's a way in which students become engaged with one another. Again, not unlike a face-to-face classroom where you would have an open discussion, letting people respond back and forth. One of the real nice things about online is these responses can be well thought out. They can be written and clarified well in the written language, whereas sometimes in a verbal discussion people might move too quickly. They may not want to speak in the depth that they could if they could think and write and then provide that information. So a discussion board does a number of things. Let me just show you one other interesting spot here. There are many ways to use a discussion board. Here we're going to take a look at a pro-con debate. This is a way to use a discussion board and to raise an issue. In this case, they're talking about quality pay and merit pay for educators. And you'll notice quite a large number of comments here that people have made. And within each comment that someone has made about how they feel about it, you've got your sub-discussions going on. You've got others commenting back and forth. So you get two levels of discussion. You get a level of discussion from the course itself, and then you also get a level of discussion within each discussion. And this is the real quality of group discussion, is that it doesn't just stop at a 15-minute class discussion. This can go on literally for a whole module, and in many cases, students will refer back to something like this weeks later and say, remember when we discussed this at this place and this time, and that information still exists. So this is a tremendous way for students to track over time their ideas, input from other students, and how these ideas can be moved forward and can be synthesized into new conversations and things that are going on. So that's a quick look at how a discussion board can help engage students in the class. Here's another great engagement opportunity for students, and that's in creating groups. You notice here we've created 5 groups, and these groups, if you were to go into them, would have your name in them so that you would know you're in that group. And this looks, again, much like the discussion board, and it functions much like the discussion board. There are places for the students to talk to each other. This is a let's talk spot where they can talk about how the group is going. Let's make some plans to do this or that. Here's a conversation that they were having about a module chapter question, and they were chatting back and forth and talking back and forth about what it is they can do. And notice how this has been built. This question started here, and if you just look here at how this moves down to the right, that's people continuing to add and continuing to add information to that question. So it's a real interesting building process. They're each asking in this pro-con debate, if you believe that, why? I believe this, let me tell you why. Well, how about this? And you begin this dialogue that often happens in argumentation, which is a positive thing, and you end up having a good pro-con debate as the students are able to work their way through this process. And again, this format of using a discussion-like board for your pro-con debates and your discussions really lends well to getting a lot of dialogue going. And it helps students get to know each other in their groups. It helps them learn to work to one another. In fact, group dynamics are very similar, whether online or in a face-to-face. They require honest, open communication. They require that students are willing to participate. Really, all of the things you would expect from a good face-to-face engaged group of students, you can expect online, and you'll see it show itself up in this process of engaging one another. Who's talking to who? What are they saying? How are they helping each other? And as a professor, you get a chance to monitor and see all of that and give comment on it in any way that you see fit. Let's take a minute to look at how assessment can be done using a rubric to get some idea for students of how they're performing on something like a discussion board. As a professor, you're very interested in making sure that the quality of discussion is high and that people aren't just giving short one-liner comments about, gee, thanks for sharing and hope you're having a nice day, and things that don't really mean much. What you want to do is you want to create for the student an idea of how it is that they can perform at the highest level on something like a group post, posting to the discussion board. This particular rubric is fairly simple. The criteria that are listed are critical thinking, contribution to the learning community, which I will say as a bias I think is very important because you are really expecting in an online scenario that students are teaching and directing one another. This is part of your job as a facilitator, is to see that you don't put in every piece of information that a student's going to hear, but you encourage them to share their experiences. Surface features, which include being able to write and manage the language effectively, and of course timeliness. It's frustrating to be in any kind of a situation where materials don't show up in a time in a discussion board where they can be used, and therefore somebody comes in later and their information really isn't relevant. And again, across the top you have outstanding, proficient, basic, and a description in the rubric of each one. And then provided along with this would be exemplars. In this case, you'd be able to have an exemplar of an outstanding post, and the student can read that exemplar to get some idea of what it is that you're looking for. Rubrics, of course, becoming more of a standard in how we go about assessing. And I think what you'll find in using rubrics is even though they're not absolute, they really help students understand what a high outcome or expectation can look like. Another example of something that's I've found has been a wonderful way to work with students on assessment. This is called a Mind Tool database. The Mind Tool database is a product that comes from computer instrument thinking, how to use computers effectively for learning. And in this case, across the left side, I'm able to put in this table, in this database, excuse me, the things that I would like students to respond to. And they're going to do this once each module. And then this will give me feedback as a professor as to what it is they're focusing on and what they're finding and what their thoughts are. This is both a combination of really content measure, because you can look for critical issues that you would expect people to find. At the same time, it's a very authentic assessment, because you can ask other kinds of questions. For example, reflections on faith issues or experiences. What are you finding from readings and devotion? Insights gained from others in the cohort or through work experience. What you're able to do here is guide their thinking towards things that are not necessarily just the content, even though we're asking about the content here. This is content coming from one of the textbooks on pro and con debates and case studies, and this is content coming from another textbook that has a lot of theoretical material on leadership. So key learnings and insights from Lunenburg. This is the textbook, and you'll see the kinds of responses. Here's somebody citing from page 91 something that they've learned from a couple of references and a quote that made a difference to them. Here's someone talking. They're also then talking about TQM, Total Quality Management, and what they're doing is they're talking again about how this impacted their thinking about learning. And the same thing carries on throughout all of this discussion. Here we're getting them talking about materials that they've found, discoveries from leadership resources. They're out looking for leadership material on their own, and they're providing this to the group, to the class, as a resource for everyone. And here they're starting to highlight, well, this is why this was important to me. This is what I found. Finding the right fit. Here's a particular article that someone found, how to get teachers to develop and lead staff development initiatives. So you're starting to get sharing going on here, as well as you're seeing where these students are thinking in terms of things they're interested in. Reflections on faith issues. Jesus promoted continuous improvement in all of us. That's the promise of confessing our sins and repenting. As I am able to read these, get some insights again into what they see as their connection with their faith statement and what it is they believe about leadership and how this wraps into how they would behave as leaders. Opportunity for me to see something even deeper. And then again, insights from their colleagues is very important. Here's someone citing one of their colleagues, and because of his passion for continuous improvement, talking about the rich resources that he's provided, talking about what the others have taught them. Again, this whole process of using a reflective tool to give you both content and authentic assessment is really wonderful for the professor. My routine with these would be to respond to each mind tool that a student does. The response might be 4 or 5 lines, specifically talking about things that they pointed out, asking questions that might get them to think in depth about something that they've mentioned, giving them other resources that they might want to pursue because they're interested in a certain area. I think I learned more from this mind tool database at the end of each one of the 2-week modules than probably anything else, because of the way in which it allows students to write and reflect on a variety of different topics, but all directly connected to the purpose and outcomes of the course. Let's close our discussion of an online course and some of the things that it has included in it with taking a look at how we bring content into these courses. Most of the basic courses in online will have some form of textbook or books that allows a student to pick up a lot of content through that vehicle. There are other ways to deliver that content as well. In this particular course, one of the ways that I can provide content as an instructor is through connections to really valuable resources. An example of that would be a source like a leadership site, the Center for Creative Leadership. I'll get that one to come up here. The Center for Creative Leadership provides me as a professor a way in which I can give content in some more technology relevant manners. Here's an example. If you were to go to this website, you will find podcasts, and these podcasts I've actually built into the course. This particular podcast, Becoming Resilient, Leadership, Uncertainty, and Learning to Thrive in Times of Change. Students will pick up this podcast, and then in with some of the assignments, they'll be making responses, and in the groups, they'll be doing dialogue regarding a podcast. You can make your own podcasts. You can find podcasts of value out in other locations. But there are multiple ways for you to bring in content to a course as a professor. And one of the ways is, again, to use the technologies now available to us through multiple ways of communicating with students. A second way is just this whole idea of being externally linked all the time. This external links page has on it quite a number of resources, and these resources are coordinated by module. So you'll notice that these are Module 3 resources and Module 4 resources. So by using this, I'm able to bring our external links and articles of all kinds into this course. Now these, again, in a face-to-face would be things that you might refer people to generally in handouts, or they'd be in books or places. You might even have them going to a library where you've got copies of these on hold. The nice part is here, they're here. They're available to a student and they can use them immediately. And in many cases, they lead students to investigating other resources that they would be interested in. So they provide links and opportunities to move back and forth on the internet, as well as within books and magazines, periodicals, all kinds of possibilities. And the last is student-directed. And as an example of a student-directed, this particular assignment goes on during the whole course, all modules. It's called the Leadership Resources Shared List. And what it is students are working as part of an assignment to collect their own resources on leadership. They're critiquing or annotating them and providing the resource and also their summary of why it's valuable to them to their fellow students. This particular document is created at the end of the course for everyone and shared back with the course, providing them with really a very excellent leadership resource list that they can put to use in their practice as leaders. This is a way in which students can be actively engaged in finding relevant information connected to the outcomes of the course. Also, by the way, it's great for the professor, because here's where you're going to find a lot of resources you may not have had the time to dig up. And by having whole groups of students out there going through that 4 million internet hits on the topic leadership, you start finding a lot of interesting things that you just probably wouldn't have time to sort out yourself if you were trying to do it by yourself. So in summary, I think what we can say about the online course is most of the vehicles that you would like to have or have as a classroom teacher, you really have as a online teacher. And there are many more functions that you can bring into this. You can bring in synchronous conversations, video conferencing, Adobe Connect conferencing. You can bring a lot of other factors in here, but as a basic course, this is a way in which students can engage with you and your topic with a lot of good discussion, finding a lot of good material from a wide range of places, and presenting it to you in a manner as a professor where you can grade it, comment on it, and allow other students to have their input, which makes the quality of the discussion even better for the students. I hope that's been helpful as you take a look at a basic structure of a course. Next time we talk, we'll take a little time to talk about those things that really seem to work well in online learning. First of all, you have to start where you're at. If you're working face-to-face, if you're doing hybrid, if you're doing fully online, what you really want to do is go out and find exemplars or models of those well-done programs or courses that look like what you're currently doing. In other words, get a vision for what it is you'd like, and then take that exemplar and ask yourself, what is it I want my students to learn? What are the outcomes that you're really going to address? And take a look at the best practices then that you're seeing. Basically what you're doing is converting where you are now, for example in a face-to-face class, to the issue of what looks good online, what works online, what do I want my students to learn, and how do I apply best practice to that. When you put that process together, it's really a three-step process. It's a process of sharing, finding out what's out there, learning what works for me, and then going and doing it yourself. And that 1, 2, 3 step really is a fairly good way to think about how do I want to get my course ready not only for just an online delivery, but for quality delivery at any time. So we'll think about that possibility or that idea of taking a look at those exemplars, knowing what you want your students to learn, and then applying those best practices. You make a lot of progress that way. I have really only one major tip for facilitating online classes, and this has been learned more by practice than anything else. And that tip is be present. You have to engage your learners, and the way you engage your learners online is that you're there with them. The idea of putting all the material online and then sort of letting everybody sift their way through it and find their way to the end doesn't engage the learner, it doesn't engage you with the learner, and it really doesn't provide that community environment that online learning is so powerful for. So my one tip for facilitating online classes is be present. And the way you do that, by the way, is through a lot of time. It is time consuming to be present online. You use certain techniques to help you reduce that time load, but you don't want to find yourself sitting back, showing up once every week or once every couple of weeks. I'll guarantee you that the students out there will know that you don't care, and that's not what you want to communicate. So show up, engage, and the students will engage with you. You can certainly use business hours, office hours, in an online environment where you let people know when you're available and you parcel out, if you're doing several classes, certain parts of the day that you're available. The other trick that I've found is be mobile. As much as you can, take some of your work with you. Working off a smartphone, working obviously off a computer wherever you are, doing some quick responses to an online question, doing quick emails to students, doing things that show them that you're out there and active and that you're listening to them as they're responding to your request for classwork really can reduce your time. What doesn't work well is to decide that you're going to deal with your online course all at once in an hour time once a week. What'll happen is you get backed up with so much communication you'll just never get through it. So spreading it out, being mobile, and making sure that that students understand if you do have times that you'll be responding, what those times are, so that they're not expecting you to respond 24/7 and you're not showing up on their schedule. Make it your schedule, but make sure they understand what it is. Let's just go back and think about online education as a phenomena that's happening right now and where is it going. To know where it's going, I think you have to ask yourself, where did it come from? It really has come from two major sort of social movements that are happening around us all the time. One is the lifelong learning movement. The philosophy of lifelong learning says when you need it, you find it. And that philosophy doesn't work well in bricks and mortar, where I have to get to a classroom, I have to get to a campus, I have to get to a professor, I have to get to something. It's a lifelong learning strategy that's supported by the opportunity to learn in that manner, which is when you need it, in a situation that will help you get what you need. The second movement, social movement that's really driving online, is a movement towards community. The idea that you used to learn really with the instruction given to you from an instructor or professor or someone who had the expertise. What you're learning now is really coming through community. People are sharing their experiences and you're sharing back yours. New information's coming out and it's coming out very rapidly and you're able to access it in online environments. It's not going to get to the textbook and it's not going to get into the classroom fast enough. The process is just prohibitive. So those two movements right now, the idea that we're in an ongoing learning, lifelong learning world, and we're doing it in community, really focuses on the technology of online learning as answers to how to do those two things successfully. For me, I'm really very curious about the whole idea of social networking and how social networking is going to mix itself into this community concept and ultimately provide really communications across the world, across subjects, across people, in ways that we would never expect as formal classrooms. The informal delivery of learning is going to become, through social networking, a dominant way in which we learn. You're just not going to go to a formal setting or a formal group and say, I need to know what you know. You're going to go to your social network and say, help me learn what I need to learn. So we're in a pretty good transition here right now, and it's moving fairly fast because technology does move quickly as it starts to develop. So what ends up happening is keeping up with how you're going to use that technology effectively has to be fairly rapidly changed too. So if you're going to be in this game, online learning, the idea of making changes and being flexible and moving fairly quickly is going to be where you're going to have to be. And even though the old saying is that nobody likes change but a wet baby, the truth is we're going to have to get kind of beyond that. We're going to have to find ourselves really be willing to do what the learners need in order to make lifelong learning and community essential to what they know and what they do in their futures.